He once had it all. To anyone watching, Mike was the embodiment of the American dream. Ambition dressed in tailored suits, confidence etched into every decision, momentum that seemed unstoppable. But no one warns you how lonely the top can be. They don't tell you that power, once achieved, whispers constantly in your ear that it can be taken away. That success isn't a destination, it's a tightrope. And below it, doubt, shame, loss, the very things Mike thought he'd outrun. When his company collapsed, it didn't feel like a single event. It felt like death by 1,000 cuts. Each day, another piece of his identity peeled away. First, the assistant stopped calling. Then, the calls from reporters asking for comment. Then came the messages from old colleagues. "So sorry to hear," followed by silence. The kind of silence that fills rooms, swallows hope, and tells you you're no longer useful. Mike wasn't just broke, he was broken. And yet, there was something sacred in that breaking. Because for the first time in decades, there was no ladder to climb, no status to defend, just him, a man without the armor, a man with nothing left to hide behind. Rehook. Maybe that's the moment real growth begins, not when we rise, but when we're stripped bare of everything we thought made us valuable. What if rock bottom isn't a curse, but a mirror? In the void of his stripped-down life, time slowed. The chaos of meetings and targets gave way to quiet mornings, where the only urgency was boiling water for coffee, where success wasn't measured by inboxes, but by his ability to sit with himself and not flee. And those notebooks? They became his sanctuary. Each line was raw, unearned, not written for an audience, just scars on paper. I miss who I used to be. I don't know who to call. I feel ashamed when I see someone in a suit. There's something about writing your pain in ink. It forces you to face it, to own it, not dramatize it, not justify it, just name it. In those pages, Mike wasn't trying to fix himself. He was finally telling the truth. And that truth cracked something open. Because when he picked up that dusty copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, it didn't read like philosophy. It read like a man, an emperor, also struggling to stay human in a world that demands masks. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Mike reread that line 10 times. He didn't feel powerful, but what if strength had nothing to do with how others saw you? What if power was the discipline to govern your inner world, even when your outer one was falling apart? He began observing his thoughts like a scientist, the self-loathing, the imaginary arguments, the fantasies of what if. They came, he watched, and then they passed. This was new. Mike used to believe every thought deserved a reaction. Now he understood what the Stoics meant when they said, "You don't control the wind, only the sails." He didn't need to change the world to be free. He just needed to stop being ruled by his mind. The more he practiced, the more he saw. He noticed how his ego had hidden behind ambition, how his identity was built like a house of glass, beautiful from the outside, but vulnerable to every storm. And now he walked miles just to clear his head, took books to the park instead of meetings to the Ritz. At the soup kitchen where he volunteered weekly, he didn't wear a name tag or give a resume. He just showed up, present, useful. One day, Carlos, the old man with kind eyes and weathered hands, grabbed his arm. "You move different," he said, "like a man who ain't running." That stuck with Mike, because he wasn't running, not anymore. Rehook. We spend so much of our lives sprinting toward what we think will make us whole. But what if the real freedom comes when we stop running, stop chasing, and finally learn to be still? Mike's relationships changed too. He reconnected with his younger brother, who had never quite understood the corporate version of him. They cooked simple dinners, talked late into the night, no lectures, no advice, just presence. He started meeting men, not over cigars and private equity, but over coffee and quiet conversations. Men who had seen pain, who didn't flinch when he spoke about failure. Men who knew what it was like to question everything. There was Sam, a former athlete who lost his career to injury. David, a once successful realtor whose marriage imploded during the housing crash. And Ben, an Iraq veteran who taught Mike about breathing techniques and the art of grounding yourself during panic attacks. Together they formed a silent brotherhood, not bonded by success but by survival. They didn't compete, they witnessed. And Mike realized that masculinity didn't need to be armored, loud, or invincible. It could be steady, humble, accountable. He had chased admiration for so long, but in the quiet eyes of these men, he felt something deeper: respect. And then came the return, not in fanfare, not in some viral redemption story, just small consulting gigs, startups with scrappy teams, projects that needed guidance more than glory. Mike didn't advertise, didn't pitch. He showed up, listened more than he spoke, solved what he could, stayed humble when he couldn't. People began to notice his stillness. One 29-year-old founder asked him during lunch, "How do you stay so calm when everything's uncertain?" Mike smiled, "Because everything's always uncertain. We just stop pretending it's not." That answer wasn't from a textbook. It came from lived experience, from nights in his car wondering who he was, from walking through fire and realizing it doesn't destroy you, it reveals you. He taught nothing flashy, no 10-step program, just this: you are not your outcome, you are your response. That was Stoicism, not a performance, a presence. Rehook. In a world obsessed with appearance, what if your power came from stillness, not status? What if being unshakable mattered more than being impressive? Years passed. Mike didn't rebuild the old empire, he built a quiet life, a life that fit his soul, not his ego. Mornings began with meditation, not metrics. Afternoons spent in the garden, not in gridlock. His dog, Max, was a better companion than any investor. And in the evening, he'd read Seneca by the fire, letting each line soak in like a balm to the soul. Sometimes he'd get a call from a young man on the edge. Fired, divorced, lost. Mike never gave advice right away. He just asked, "Are you willing to sit with it?" Because pain is not your enemy, it's your teacher. Grief, it humbles you. Failure, it sculpts you. Silence, it teaches you to listen. This is what Stoic leadership looks like, not a man barking orders from above, but a man anchored so deeply in his values that others can feel it, even without words. Mike never got his old life back, and thank God for that. He found something better, himself. It's strange what you miss when the noise stops. Not the applause, not the deals, not the illusion of control, but the simple things. The way light filters through a window at dawn. The texture of pages in an old book. The sound of your own breath when you finally stop trying to outrun it. Mike used to believe he needed a full calendar to be worthy. That purpose came from productivity. But now he found purpose in something else, awareness. He remembered what Epictetus said. First, say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. So he stopped pretending, he stopped performing, and he started becoming. Not the man others expected, but the man he respected. His days became rituals. Every morning, cold shower, warm coffee, long walk. Not because it was trendy, but because it sharpened his senses. It reminded him that he was alive. He wrote by hand, letters to no one, reflections, gratitudes. Some days just a line. I was calm when I could have panicked, or I listened without needing to respond. This was progress, quiet, unseen, real. He understood now that resilience isn't forged in chaos, it's forged in repetition. The small daily choices to stay aligned when no one is watching. There were temptations, of course. Old colleagues reached out. One offered him a seat at a new venture, big money, fast track. Mike declined. He wasn't against success, but he refused to rent out his peace to chase it. He had made a vow to himself in that queen's apartment years ago. Never again will I abandon myself to impress the world. Rehook. What if the greatest flex is not what you've built, but what you've walked away from because it cost you your soul? Sometimes he still struggled. On winter nights when the loneliness crept in, on anniversaries of his company's launch, on mornings when the old ache of being forgotten resurfaced. But now he had tools, breathwork, journaling, long hikes, conversations with men who understood. He didn't numb it, he didn't scroll past it, he felt it. That was the difference. He realized the world doesn't need more winners. It needs more men who are willing to feel and not run, who are willing to lose without losing themselves. One day, a young man from a consulting group he'd mentored came up after a workshop and asked, "Mike, if you could go back, would you do it all again? The company, the rise, the crash?" Mike paused, thought about it. "No," he said, "but I'd go through the fire again, because the man who came out on the other side is the one I was always meant to be." Now, on Sunday mornings, Mike walks a trail behind his cabin. It leads to a small overlook where the valley stretches for miles. He stands there, hands in his coat pockets, breathing in the stillness. No reception, no notifications, just sky and wind and clarity. He often thinks about how he once believed happiness came from winning, but Stoicism had taught him something different. That joy is not the absence of struggle, but the ability to stay present through it. That freedom isn't about having options, but having conviction. That power isn't about dominating others, but disciplining yourself. At night, when the fire crackles low and Max is curled at his feet, Mike sometimes revisits the journals from his collapse. He reads entries like time capsules, echoes of a man on the brink. He doesn't judge them. He honors them, because that pain was sacred. It was his initiation. And if you're reading this, if you're in your own collapse, understand this: you're not weak for feeling lost. You're not broken because you're hurting. You are simply being invited to meet yourself, stripped of pretense, beyond performance. This is where real men are born, not on stages, but in silence. So if you're sitting in your car tonight like Mike once was, wondering who you are without your job, without her, without the numbers in the bank, you're in the exact right place. Because what comes next isn't about fixing yourself. It's about facing yourself. The parts that ache, the beliefs that no longer serve you, the lies you've told yourself just to survive. Let them burn, let it all fall away. And what remains? Truth, grit, grace. The ingredients of a man who leads, not with noise, but with presence. Rehook. Your old life was built on expectations, but your new life, it will be built on truth. Not who the world told you to be, but who you choose to become. Mike never got famous. He never made a comeback, but he became something far more rare, a man at peace with himself. His life was a quiet flame, not loud but steady, and anyone who came close could feel its warmth. Some days he got letters from men across the country, struggling, searching, asking, "How did you survive it?" Mike would write back short and simple, "I stopped needing to win. I started needing to be real." And now, to you reading this, if you're in a season of loss, of confusion, of silence, good. You're being remade. The world will offer you shortcuts, hacks, distractions. Ignore them. Choose instead to feel, to face the pain, to write your own meditations in real time. You're not meant to be fearless. You're meant to be courageous. You're not meant to avoid pain. You're meant to transcend it. This is the path of the Stoic leader, not flashy, not loud, not easy, but unshakable. So stop trying to go back to who you were. He was built for a different world, Build someone new, someone calm in the storm, present in the pressure, rooted in what matters. That is Stoicism. That is power. That is you becoming. Mike once thought stillness meant stagnation, that slowing down was a sign of weakness, that not striving meant surrendering. But as he sat on his cabin porch one crisp October morning, mug of black coffee in hand, wrapped in a flannel shirt that had seen better years, he realized something new. Stillness wasn't emptiness, it was power, refined, because only a man who doesn't need noise can truly hear his own voice. And only a man who stops chasing applause can finally feel the quiet approval of his own conscience. He'd spent decades performing, curating, impressing, selling, but now the performance was over, and in that space, he met a different version of himself, one he didn't recognize at first, one that didn't need to be spectacular, one that was simply awake, re-hook. What if the man you're trying so hard to become is waiting for you, just on the other side of silence? The transformation wasn't dramatic, it was subtle, like healing often is. Mike didn't write a best-selling book, he didn't turn his pain into a podcast. He didn't rebrand failure as a lesson in disguise. He simply lived. And that, ironically, became his greatest message. Because in a world obsessed with reinvention and constant improvement, there's something radical about contentment, about not needing to be more, about doing the inner work without advertising the journey. He learned to find beauty in the ordinary, chopping wood, cooking stew, mending a fence, watching the snow fall for hours without checking his phone. He reread Letters from a Stoic by Seneca. The passage that struck him this time was, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." He closed the book and laughed softly to himself, because he finally understood. Most of his suffering hadn't come from what happened. It had come from his resistance to what happened. The collapse of his company had hurt, yes. But what nearly destroyed him was the shame, the story, the belief that he was somehow less of a man because of it. But Stoicism had taught him to challenge that narrative, not with denial, but with discipline. Mike kept a worn stone on his desk, just a smooth river rock he'd found on a walk one spring morning. It wasn't special, but it reminded him, stay grounded. He called it his memento humilitatis, his reminder of humility, because even now, when peace had become his default, pride still whispered. The urge to prove, to compare, to perform never vanished completely. But now he saw it coming. He recognized the ego's games, and he chose differently. Every time he felt the urge to post something online just to stay relevant, he'd ask himself, am I sharing this to serve or to be seen? Every time he judged another man's choices, he'd ask, what fear in me is being triggered right now? Every time he felt envy rise toward younger men building empires, toward friends buying second homes, he'd whisper a quiet, stoic mantra, amor fati, love your fate, not tolerate it, love it, embrace it, choose it. Even the uncomfortable parts, especially the uncomfortable parts. Rehook. True power isn't avoiding discomfort. It's choosing to walk through it with your head held high and your heart wide open. One spring, a local high school teacher asked Mike to speak to a group of senior boys. He hesitated. He wasn't a motivational speaker. He had no slides, no 10 rules to success, but he agreed. He stood in front of 20 young men, most of them distracted, skeptical, half-checking their phones, and he told them the truth. Not about success, but about falling apart. He told them about the nights in Queens with no money and no plan, about the rage he felt toward himself, about the day he read Marcus Aurelius and realized he'd been fighting the wrong war, the one against the outside world instead of the one within. He didn't give them advice, he gave them permission to fail, to question, to lose their way, and to rebuild, not from ego, but from awareness. When he finished, one boy, silent the entire time, raised his hand and asked, How do you know who you really are? Mike thought about it, then said, you find out who you are when everything else is taken away, and you still choose to show up anyway. Years later, Mike wrote a letter to himself. He didn't mean to, it just came out. It began with, "To the man I thought I had to become," and it ended with, "Thank you for everything you taught me, but I don't need you anymore. I've met someone better, me, without the mask." He folded the letter and placed it in the back of his journal, because some goodbyes are sacred, even to versions of ourselves that once kept us alive. Rehook. What if the strongest thing you can do as a man isn't to hold it all together, but to release who you no longer need to be? Sometimes Mike missed the old world, the speed, the adrenaline, the high of the chase, but then he remembered that's the price. The anxiety that clung to his chest like armor, the nights when sleep was impossible, the fear that if he stopped moving even for a second, it would all fall apart. Now he slept deeply, he loved slowly, he spoke intentionally, he laughed more often, not the forced kind, but the kind that comes from knowing that nothing is guaranteed, and that's what makes it beautiful. He still failed sometimes, still had off days, still forgot his own teachings, but now he forgave quickly. He began again and again and again. That was the rhythm of his new life, not perfection, but presence. And so we return to the man by the fire, not famous, not followed, but free. He leads not by title, but by example. He teaches not with words, but with how he lives. And if you asked him now, was it worth it, losing everything? He'd look you in the eye and say, it was never about losing, it was about finally waking up. If you are standing in the ashes of your old life, good. That means the fire has done its job. Now it's your turn to rise, not with vengeance, not with desperation, but with stillness, with purpose, with presence, because the world doesn't need more noise. It needs more men who have been through the fire and chose not to harden, but to heal. You don't need to shout, just stand, calm, grounded, unmoved, unshakable. That's what Stoicism gives you, not immunity from pain, but the courage to walk through it, with dignity, with clarity, with grace. He began to see time differently. In the past, time was a transaction. Every hour traded for achievement, every minute optimized. Rest was guilt, slowness was failure. But now time was presence. He would sit for an hour watching sunlight filter through the trees, no agenda. He walked his dog without headphones. He cooked slowly, chopping vegetables with care, stirring soups that didn't need to be perfect. Life no longer needed to be impressive. It needed to be real. And in that space, he began to hear something that had been missing for years. His own voice. Not the one that sold deals. Not the one that convinced investors. The one that was buried beneath ambition and noise. The one that had always been there, quiet, patient, waiting. It told him, "You are enough without the proving." He remembered a quote from Seneca, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." That hit hard because Mike realized most of his panic, shame, and fear had been self-created, not from the losses themselves, but from the meaning he had attached to them. Failure hadn't destroyed him, his resistance to it had, and now, without resistance, he could breathe again. Rehook. You see, most men don't break because life hits them too hard. They break because they were never taught how to be still when the hits come. They were trained to run, to hustle, to distract, to dominate. But Stoicism teaches something radical, that your true power is not in escaping suffering, but in standing inside it and remaining calm. One day, while reading at a local bookstore cafe, Mike met a young man named Elijah, mid-20s, bright eyes, restless energy, startup founder. They talked. Elijah asked questions, fast and eager. How did you rebuild? How do you stay so calm? What do you do in moments of uncertainty? Mike smiled, not dismissively, but with the kind of smile that comes from scars that have turned into skin. I stopped believing I had to fix everything, and I started being the kind of man who could endure anything. That line landed. They met again, then again. Soon, Elijah introduced Mike to more young men, each chasing something: status, funding, fame, influence. And to each of them, Mike offered the same truth. None of that will fill the void inside you. But if you learn to face that void, it might teach you who you really are. His quiet cabin slowly became a sanctuary, not of followers, not of fame, but of men seeking something deeper, a kind of unofficial brotherhood, not a retreat, not therapy, just firelight, food, and honesty. They spoke of failures, fears, addictions, shame, and nobody flinched, because Mike had modeled something most had never seen before, a man who had nothing to prove, yet carried deep authority, not from titles, but from presence. Re-hook. In a world obsessed with performance, presence becomes rare. And in a world full of men pretending to be strong, the one who dares to be vulnerable without collapsing becomes magnetic. This is not about becoming soft. It's about becoming solid, unshakable, not because you dominate, but because you don't need to. One evening, sitting around the fire, a man named Victor, divorced, fired, and freshly out of rehab, asked a quiet question: how do you stop hating yourself? Mike didn't answer quickly. He let the question hang in the cold air alongside the smoke and starlight. Then he said, you stop mistaking your past for your identity, and you start keeping small promises to yourself. That's how it begins. Victor nodded and wept, because deep down, that's what most men are looking for. Not hacks, not 10 steps, not more noise, just a path back to themselves. Mike no longer feared failure. He had befriended it, like a tough old teacher who had dragged him through hell, not to destroy him, but to strip away the parts that weren't real. The part of him that equated love with performance. The part that needed applause to feel alive. The part that feared silence because it echoed with self-doubt. Gone. What was left? Stillness, conviction, clarity. Re-hook. If you've ever wondered why the Stoics spoke so much of death, it's not because they were morbid. It's because death is the ultimate mirror. And when you live with death close, when you remember you're not guaranteed another breath, you stop wasting time performing for people who don't even see you. You start asking, what kind of man do I want to be when no one is watching? Years after his fall, Mike received an email from his old rival, the one who filed the lawsuit. A single line: forgive me, I was angry, you didn't deserve that. Mike stared at the screen. No rush to respond. No need to replay old battles. He simply closed the laptop and went outside. The moon was full, the woods were quiet, and he stood there, arms crossed, heart open, not to the apology, but to life itself. Because he no longer needed closure from others, he had found closure in himself. When men asked him if he was happy now, he would often say, I'm not happy, I'm whole. Because Stoicism doesn't promise happiness, it promises freedom. Freedom from the tyranny of ego, from the addiction to more, from the illusion that you must be someone other than yourself to be loved, respected, or strong. Mike's life became a quiet testament to that truth. Re-hook. The world will always tell you to get back up quickly, to rebuild fast, to show you're unbroken. But maybe the real power is not in how quickly you rise. It's in how deeply you root before rising again. Mike never returned to his old life, not because he couldn't, but because he no longer needed to. He had built something stronger than a business, a reputation, or even a name. He had built himself, piece by piece, principle by principle, flame by flame, and this time the foundation wasn't made of approval or ambition. It was made of silence, integrity, and the kind of peace that doesn't need to be seen to be real. He learned that you don't rebuild a Stoic life by changing the world around you. You rebuild it by changing how you relate to pain, loss, and uncertainty, by standing still when everything around you shakes. This is what makes men unbreakable, not that they avoid the fire, but that they learn to walk through it without losing their soul. If this story stirred something in you, even just a flicker, don't let it fade. Here's your challenge. For the next 3 days, do these 3 things. 1. Sit in silence for 10 minutes each morning. No music, no phone, just your breath. Face whatever comes up. 2. Write down one emotion you felt during the day and one Stoic response to it. Example: felt envy. Stoic response: focus on what's within my control. 3. Do something difficult without complaining. A cold shower, a tough workout, a painful conversation. Whatever it is, embrace the discomfort. That's it. Simple, not easy. But neither is rebuilding your life, and yet you're here. This channel isn't about hype or surface-level motivation. It's about becoming the kind of man who endures storms without flinching, who lives by principle, and who never needs to shout to be heard. If that's who you're becoming, subscribe. We build men like that here, quietly, relentlessly, together.